As I mentioned at the very beginning of Mass, we have a lot of ground to cover in one liturgy today as we bring the fifth Sunday of Easter and certainly May, the month of May, dedicated to Mary together. And the readings today, we could be here all day. There's an awful lot there to focus on, but only one part of that I will focus on, and then would like to say a few words about our Blessed Mother. But to begin, I'd like to pose this sentence to you, which should be up there on the screen. If you believe what you like in the Gospels and reject what you don't like, it is not the gospel you believe, but yourself. If you believe what you like in the Gospels and reject what you don't like, it is not the gospel you believe, but yourself. Now, we haven't had a quiz in a long time, so, we're going to have a quiz this morning, and I'll give you all four choices, and then you get to vote. First of all, who wrote this and when? Choice one, did I write it for today? That's choice one. Choice two, was it written by a saint in the past, for the past? 3, was it written in the past but applies to us today? Or number 4, it is yet another one of my shameless ploys to trick you. So, who votes for number 1, that I wrote it for us for today? Anybody vote for that? Say, I knew you were very wise. I'm not capable of one sentence with filled that. It would take me books to write that, Number 2, how many of you think it was written by a saint in the past for the past? They're all afraid. Number 3, how many of you think it was written in the past but applies to us today? And how many of you think it's another shameless ploy of mine? I always can count on Steve Glamuzina to raise his hand on that. So, the best answer, of course, is number 3. It was written in the past, but certainly applies not only to the past, but today. Actually, it was written by St. Augustine in the 5th century. And I think if you really look at that sentence, it could well have been written today, for us today. And why? Well, of course, our culture is one where many believe that each person picks for themselves and chooses for themselves what to believe. They rationalize away or justify things in their own mind. Of course, we call that relativism, and we've talked so many times about relativism that each individual chooses their own truth. Relativism, however, for us doesn't really apply, because relativism, although each person can accept their own truth, the one thing that relativism will not accept is a universal truth. So if you subscribe to the belief, as we do as Catholics, that there is one truth which comes from God, relativism will not accept that as valid. As Catholics, and probably for the majority of Christians, we do believe in a universal truth which comes from the Scripture, which is the teaching of God. And of the many, many things brought up in the Scripture today, the one point to simply make is that the gospel really focuses on that universal truth, not a relativism, a universal truth. Jesus says very clearly, he does not mince words, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Simply stated, Jesus, who we celebrate as the bread of life during the season of Easter, and certainly the Good Shepherd, another image we have of Jesus, the bread of life, the Good Shepherd. He is not an option. He is the only option. The only option. We use a term in modern times, and for some years, cafeteria Catholics. That we think we go to a cafeteria, we can pick and choose the things we want, but leave behind the things we don't want, just as if we went to a cafeteria style or smorgasbord-style restaurant, But there is no such thing as a cafeteria Catholic. There is no such thing as a cafeteria disciple. Either you're a disciple or you're not. There is only one option: to recognize Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. He clearly states that. But we also are reminded in the Scripture today that there's a cost to that discipleship. There's a cost if we choose to recognize Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. We're reminded very clearly in the second reading that there will be rejection. Rejection, just as Jesus, the cornerstone, was rejected, but he became the cornerstone of the structure. Just as Jesus was rejected, so too, if we live and subscribe and teach what he taught, so too we will experience rejection. I've had many conversations over the course of 31 years as a priest with individuals who've told me, well, the church threw me out. The church rejected me. The church does not welcome me. Well, in 31 years, I can tell you I've never thrown anybody out of church. I try to do the reverse. I try to get everybody back in. That's my goal. And I have to honestly say I don't know even my contemporary colleagues who've thrown anybody out. But maybe the true fact is that when someone feels that the church has rejected them or thrown them out, it is they themselves who have rejected Christ and his teaching. That's really what I have experienced in 31 years. When someone says, well, I'm not welcomed in the church, well, it's not that the church has rejected them, but they have rejected Christ themselves. And they're transferring that rejection upon the church because they don't want to acknowledge Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. A disciple of Christ needs to witness and to safeguard the truth of the gospel. Just as we hear in the first reading, the apostles went out and so to take care of the needs of the widows, They addressed the need of the time. And so you and I are sent out in this place and this time to do the exact same thing. The first point, simply, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I'd like to take that thought to the second point as we honor Mary. Once again, the month of May, a part of our belief, as Catholics, we honor Mary. Of course, we do not worship her. We worship only God. We honor Mary, and every honoring of Mary points directly towards Jesus Christ himself. And unfortunately, so many Christians who are outside of our faith criticize us for our honoring of Mary. I'm sure many of you, if I ask for a show of hands, I will ask for a show of hands. Second quiz, how many of you have ever heard people criticize us for our honoring of Mary? How many of you have heard that? And they all say, well, we only believe what's in the Scripture. Well, then they don't know the Scripture, because it's all in the Scripture. Many of our prayers honoring Mary are right there in the New Testament. And the honoring of Mary is simply the carrying on of the tradition of Queen Mother of the Old Testament. What is it that we learn from the Old Testament that is the very foundation, the rooting of our honoring of Mary? Well, first of all, in the Old Testament, of course, there's this term used, the Queen Mother, Mother of the King, Queen Mother, term used in the Old Testament. And the Queen Mother played a significant role in the establishment of her son on the throne. If you look at the Davidic kingdom, if you look at all of the kings of Israel of old, there was this title, Queen Mother. And the title was for the mother of the king, not the wife. And why? The king had many wives, and the king had many children. Now, if any of the married men would like to answer this, you can, but, do you ever go against your wife? Not good for business. It's not good. And so the king in his wisdom said, well, I'm not siding with one wife over the other, but the king only had one mother. So who was the queen in the kingdom? It was the mother of the king. The mother was the mother of the king who was entrusted with raising all of the children. And the succession was not based on just who was born first, but mother who raised the children, she played a significant role in picking which grandson was going to be the successor. Also, the scripture writers list in the Old Testament not only the name of the king, but we always hear the name of Queen Mother. We don't really hear the names of all the wives or all the other kids, but we hear the name of Queen Mother always. Queen Mother played a significant role in the establishment of who would sit on the throne. Secondly, Queen Mother in Israel had a powerful influence on the kingdom. The Queen Mother had a powerful influence. And why? Because the Queen Mother was older than the king. She was around a lot longer. And if you look in the second book of Kings, chapter 10, you will hear where the people sought out Queen Mother rather than searching out the king. We also hear in Jeremiah chapter 13 that Queen Mother wore a crown. She sat next to her son, the king, on the throne. Gee, where have I heard that before? Oh yes, our belief about Mary, Queen Mother, enthroned as Queen of heaven and earth beside her son. Queen Mother sat enthroned in Israel next to her son. And thirdly, Queen Mother in Israel was the intercessor on behalf of the people. If you read the first book of Kings, chapter 2, you'll hear the story of Bathsheba, who was the mother of Solomon. And the people came to Bathsheba looking for intercession. And so Bathsheba went to her son, and her son said, "Come here, sit beside me, mother. Tell me what it is you need, and I will grant it for you." It was the role of Queen Mother to intercede. So how does all this apply to Mary? Well, first of all, Mary did not seek the throne for Jesus, but Mary served God with her fiat, her yes, and closely related to Jesus' kingship. And what do we hear? The beautiful prayer of the Magnificat, "My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord." Mary always pointing to the greatness of her son. Secondly, we know that Mary never ruled in place of Jesus. However, Jesus was always inclined to pay attention to his mother. We hear that in the wedding story of Cana. Mary comes and says they have no more wine, and Jesus says, "Well, how does this concern affect me?" And Mary turns and says, "Do whatever he tells you. Do whatever he tells you." There she is, pointing to Jesus, but also interceding. That third point, Mary intercedes, not only at that wedding feast of Cana, but for you and for me today. To end with a simple story, a story I know I've told before, among the many treasures of my life. You know, yesterday at First Holy Communion, I showed all of the first communicants my suit that I wore at my First Holy Communion. I still have it. It doesn't fit anymore, but I still have it. My mother saved it. And I've showed you this before, I'm sure. It's a little picture frame. One side is Jesus, one side is Mary. My mother used to have this on her dresser. And I remember one time, I believe I was in 4th or maybe it was 5th grade, I failed a science test. And I remember when it came time for the next science test, I was beside myself. And my mother, before school that day, took me to her bedroom, and we stood before this very image. And my mother said, "We're going to stand here together and we're going to pray, and we're going to ask Mary to intercede for you to Jesus, her son, so you do well on that test." And I remember my mother very clearly saying, "After all, what son will not do everything his mother asks?" I think there was a double meaning there, I got 100 on that test, let me tell you, very sincerely. Trust in Mary. Trust in Mary to lead her to the heart of her son. And trust Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. And that's simply a possible option for life.